In the reading corner today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest Elizabeth Uviebinene. She studied politics and international studies at the University of Warwick and then worked as a marketing manager in the city. Out of this experience was born the book, co-authored with Yomi Adegoke, the best-selling book, Slay in Your Lane, a life guide for young Black British women. In 2018, she was the recipient of a Marie Claire Future Shaper Award. And now Elizabeth and Yomi have teamed up again with their first book in a middle grade series, The Offline Diaries. It's a story about friendship and loyalty revolving around school and home, and it's told through a mix of diary entries and social media conversations. Elizabeth, welcome. And my first question is that you already have a very successful career in business and in writing. So what prompted you to write for a younger audience?
It came off like a natural progression from our first book, actually, Slay in Your Lane, where it was all about, empowering and inspiring young Black British women. And we were young ourselves. So we asked successful Black British women how they slayed in their lanes, essentially. But we would often be met with questions like, oh, are you guys going to do a children's book? The younger generation need something like this and things like that. And we were like, well, we don't know if we're going to create Slay in Your Lane, but a younger version. It didn't feel right for us. So we took our time to kind of realize, if we did a children's book, what would it feel like? What would it sound like? What would it be? And for us, it would just be about friendship, because when it's all said and done, Yomi and I are best friends. We've known each other since we were 18, and we're like sisters. So we think that friendship is such a universal, experience. And we were like, that's what we want to write about. We've all been kids, we've all been children. We've all experienced the fallouts as children as well as adults. So we were like, let's write a story that feels true to who we are. And also let's write something that's relevant for kids who are, in year 7. Like, what's relevant? Like social media, like what are the pressures of growing up now that, that we didn't have, and things like that. So we had one conversation. People think this is crazy. We had one conversation and then we ended up writing it later. So it was but again, everything me and Yomi do, it's so seamless. We don't really overthink things. We're always really on the same page and things like that. So it felt like a very natural progression.
So this story is told from two perspectives. We've got Ade and Shanice, who strike up a close friendship at the beginning of the story. I wondered if you could introduce us to those girls and tell us a little bit about how they come to be so close.
So they meet in a hair shop. So they meet in Shanice's dad's hairdressers, and they realize that they have very similar diaries. So Shanice calls hers a journal because she thinks she's a bit above calling it a diary. And Ade calls hers a diary, and it's all, it's pink and it's got flowers on, it's all embellished and it's very girly. And they kind of have that bond of writing, and they write for different reasons. So Shanice is experiencing bereavement. Her mum passed away. We kind of touch upon that, but we don't really go into the backstory, but we kind of talk about how she deals with that as well. But she deals a bit with writing and kind of writing down her ideas. And she's got this teacher who says, your ideas are going to change the world someday. And then Ade is more of a kind of sulky, teen, that kind of vibe, where she writes about, everything, just what's going on and stuff like that. So she's also going through family changes at home. Her mum has married a new person. So they're both going through different things, but they seek solace in each other, but also through writing in these journals and diaries. So yeah, that's how they kind of really have that bond.
And I was really interested in how this was written. You do take the diary format, and we learn about this through the two girls' diary entries, the offline diaries. But then we also have their communication with a social media platform, which is quite alien to me, but obviously not to the young people that are going to be reading these books. And then I was interested in how that allowed a different kind of perspective on this story. Now, the question, I suppose, is how did you come to decide to write it like that? And as co-authors, I'm just interested, did you write the different girls?
Yomi is Ade and I'm Shanice.
Ah.
Yeah. People, I think surely is like when it comes to writing and our kind of like writing partnership and how we've been able to do it, it's so seamless again. Like, and I don't mean to keep banging the drum of like things being seamless, but not saying things aren't challenging and can be challenging. But I think that we work so well together when it comes to taking different parts of a writing journey of a book. So when we thought, okay, how can we write a children's book, fiction at that, while writing it together? Like, this is a big challenge. How do we do this? And we were just like, well, why don't we do it in diaries? Because you take one character, I take one character. And yes, it's going to be quite challenging because unlike nonfiction, we can't write in isolation because one chapter leads into another. So Yomi wrote hers first because she's prolific. And so she wrote all Ade's. We had like an outline of what the story is going to be. So we had an initial conversation, we had like one conversation. Then she went away and wrote all Ade's bit. So 20,000 words, like she kind of like wrote all the different bits. And then I went in and then I wrote all Shanice's entries in response to all of Ade's. And again, like there were one or two things that felt, okay, we may need to change this because now this doesn't, totally work. But in a grand scheme of things, it felt so natural. And I think the format felt, because it's interesting because it's all about diaries and journaling and diaries and writing. Yet what we're talking about, is social media and that world. So it's interesting how we've been able to kind of like have this multimedia approach because, yes, it's convenient because it's two of us. So it makes sense for us to do that logistically, but it's also very relevant for this audience. This audience, yes, has a proximity to the online world that we just never did. So it felt true. We didn't have to force anything because the reality is people, middle graders still write. They write diaries and they kind of express themselves through the written word. So I think the basis of Offline Diaries is essentially told through that form because it genuinely is the most relevant.
So we've got these two voices that you wrote separately. Fascinating process. Then where did the chat back bit fit into that?
So the chat back conversations, which is this like made up platform that we created in this world of Ade and Shanice, where it's a mixture of, TikTok versus Instagram, that sort of social media platform. And those coming later, because those serve a particular purpose in the kind of fallout between Shanice and Ade. So those bits were written because they had different perspectives. So obviously Ade, has a different relationship with the most popular girls in school. And then Shanice, who has always been there, doesn't really partake in that. So the social media element comes in later because that's where the friction like really comes in and comes alive.
Mm. And you've taken us to, the real nub of this story, which is there are popular girls in the school and there are people who are in and people who are out. And Ade, who is new to the school, is sort of taken under the wing of these popular girls and is taken in by them and consequently keeps her friendship with Shanice secret. And it still continues on the social media, but she doesn't really want it to be so public in school. There is one point early on in the story where they're told that they will be spending 5 years with their classmates. And this is what happens in school, isn't it? We spend 5 years of our time with people who may not be our people. And we have so much lack of power in choosing who we want to be with when we're at school.
Exactly. And there's that element of like, we're all kind of stuck here for 5 years. And those 5 years can be one of the most, happiest and parts of, your childhood, your memories, or can be very difficult. So we kind of had to acknowledge that, like with life, we all have to kind of work through some things that are quite unpleasant and get on with people, which is what, as an adult now, that's the reality, right? And we kind of like try to make a nod to what life is like, really. And we just, so I think that was very much important for us to acknowledge that.
I think you're so right. But I think somehow in school it's much more intense, because somewhere along the line you start to choose pathways for yourself, like the kind of work you end up doing. You are likely to be with more like-minded people. But in those early secondary years, you have no choice at all in a way. And you're always with people of the same age. That doesn't happen to us as adults. We can mix with people of all ages.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was just really important for us to make sure that we kind of highlighted. And because one thing that's really lovely about this story is the friendship element, because we may go through periods of our life when we may not be happy in a particular context or whatever, but when you have the right friendships and the right people around you, you are able to kind of get through that. And you should never have to tolerate going through life in that way. But it just further highlights how important real relationships are and people who love and support you. And you see that in the form of like Shanice's relationship with her brother changes a little bit. You know, she's got an older brother, you know, she sees her brother as, you know, as like, oh, he's annoying. And they have this kind of very typical dynamic of younger sister, older brother. And when her back's up against the wall with the whole Ade and, you know, the triple A's in school, he offers a perspective. So we just try to be as, I think growing up, I loved and Yomi loved Jackie Wilson books. And I look back and I'm like, it was so transformative, because what was so powerful about those books was just the realism. Some books were, you know, there were parts that were gritty and, you know, not the most pleasant, but you learn from them. And I look back and it prepared me for like parts of life that I'm still going through right now. So I think relationships and personal relationships are such a key theme. There's friendship, there's the relationship with her dad, there's a relationship with Ade, her stepdad at the start of the book. Doesn't really get along with him. And then their relationship changes. So there's that real nod again to relationships are really important and friendships are really important.
A couple of things that I want to pick up from what you've said there. First of all, can I say that James turns out to be one of my favourite characters. I love the way that he looks after Shanice when she really needs it, and the best in him comes out at that point. I love that. I also love that you mentioned Jacqueline Wilson there, because, you know, for listeners to this podcast, this is kind of where your books sit. They feel like, you know, a Jacqueline Wilson type book. Of course, it's wholly your own, but they're doing very similar things. I also wanted to pick out, though, when you're talking about people that help us, there are a couple of women in this book that I think are really important. You know, they are potential mentors to these young girls, Auntie Kim and Mrs. P.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to look for those adults. You know, as young people, we can tend to not do that, I think. But there are people there that can help.
Oh, absolutely. I had a teacher called Miss Rodriguez, and I wrote about her in my first book, actually, where I had spent my bus money on sweets and things like that, and I didn't have money to go home. And she lent me money. I'll never forget. And obviously that was just like a one-off like case, but I look back at my life and there are amazing women who have just been able to help me, teachers, especially seeing things in me that I didn't see myself, sometimes being hard on me, because obviously you need that to kind of steer you on the right path a little bit. But ultimately, I would never be here where I am right now, and I'm sure Yomi would say the same thing, if we didn't have teachers who are invested in us past getting good grades. And I think that was what was really special about writing the relationship with Shanice and Mrs. P, because Ade doesn't get that relationship. She's like, oh, fine, she doesn't have a good relationship with Mrs. P. So they don't both have to like the same teacher, but Shanice has that real, what's that story, Matilda? I love the relationship with obviously Mrs. Honey and Matilda. And I used to, growing up, I used to fantasize about that relationship, because I used to be like, oh, when things weren't always great at home, I'd be like, oh, the teacher would just, rescue me and things like that. And these relationships do, they do kind of, they mean a lot to you when you're a kid, and you look back and you just go, wow, how did I get through that? And you just remember, wow, Miss Rodriguez helped me. This teacher helped me. Mrs. Johnson told me this, and It's always those things.
I think something else that I really appreciated in your book, as somebody who obviously loves books and reading and writing, is that there's an homage really to writing in here. Obviously, we've got the two diaries, which are offline. They're real diaries. They're real books in which the girls hold their thoughts, their feelings. And then later on, there's an incident where Ade has to write a letter, and that's quite different from the other forms of communication. And I'm not going to give too much of the story away, but I was really interested in what the letter writing could do that the other forms like email and texting couldn't.
I really like that question because it's exploring like real communications. Someone listening to this might be like, who sends letters? So not me personally, but Yomi had a fallout with a friend. I don't think she'll mind me saying. And, this friend was in the wrong and tried to kind of, in various means get back in contact with Yomi. But obviously she wasn't very much happy to kind of receive that at that point. And I remember the person asked me like, what would you do? And I was like, I would maybe send her a letter because there's a real personal like element of being sorry when you do that. It shows a real effort's been made. It feels a real remorse. So this person did that, and it made a big difference in them becoming friends. And they're friends, they're friends to this day. So that is based on real experience. And we were 27 or something. Ade and Shanice are like 12. So it's not far fetched to say that this is not a real mode of like communication. And I think what's really powerful is because how do you show that you are sorry? Like, it's a text enough. It's an email. It's a phone call. There's so many ways like that we communicate with our friends, and so we kind of want to explore it in that way between Ade and really like bring that to life a little bit.
You have to give a letter its attention, don't you?
Absolutely, and when it's handwritten as well, not like it's just so personal. Like it's almost as if you want to cherish it and keep it. It's like birthday cards, and I feel like just because the world these children are growing up in, everything is digital, and that's amazing. Like, make no bones about it, that's amazing. However, we can't beat real human contact, which is handwriting, voice, like hearing someone's voice, like a call. So it's really important young people don't forget that, especially when it comes to well-being. It's checking them up on people and building relationships on social media is great. However, I think it's really important that as these kids grow up, that they remember that things that are going to make you feel full and your heart feel full and make you feel warm and make you feel happier are the relationships that you build in real life and the relationships that you invest in that go beyond an emoji. And I think that is really at the heart of what the Offline Diaries is really, really trying to do. I think that's why it becomes really important. And because, we've got a mental health crisis and, not to be too dark, but that's just a reality. And spending so much time on digital modes of communication does contribute to that. So it's really just important for us to highlight that, how powerful it is to build real friendships offline.
You've mentioned Jacqueline Wilson already and your childhood reading. I do want to ask the question as to whether you were aware as a 12, 13-year-old, were you aware that there were not enough Black characters in books that you were reading?
Oh, that's such a good question. I was aware of Married Black Woman being a Black woman and noughts and crosses and things like that. But I don't think I was aware about the cat. No, not in that way. And that's the thing. I've got to be like obviously super, super honest. Like I wasn't aware because I guess you don't know what you don't know as well. But I think that's why I love Jacqueline Wilson because yes, race is really important and cultural background is really important when it comes to children's books. However, I say that to also say, and to also believe that what was so powerful about the Jacqueline Wilson books is, and this is what we try to replicate with the Offline Diaries, is it doesn't matter if you are not Black, if you are not white. Like there are very strong themes that you'll be able to resonate with. And that was the power of like those books. Ade and Shanice are obviously two Black girls, but they are not, the book isn't about race. We don't touch upon it in a way that there's a lesson to be had. it's natural, and I think it's seamless. They're both of them being Black girls. You feel it because of the way they talk about their hair. You know, one of the most powerful illustrations in the book is, for me anyway, personally, is them being at the hairdressers and Shanice's dad's hairdressers and getting their hair done. Like, when I got the book, I just almost started crying, because culture and all of these things, and, you know, diversity doesn't have to mean trauma. It doesn't have to mean sitting someone down and talking about race and and chapter and verse. It's just a seamless introduction to people's experiences that are different. My hair doesn't grow down, it grows up into an afro. So seeing that should not be a political statement. And when you're that age, it's not. You just do things because it's like, you know, because your mum says that's the easiest way to wear your hair, you know? So I think for us, with the Offline Diaries, we didn't want to create, that would have been, I guess, what people would have expected from us, if I'm honest, especially writing Staying Lane. People definitely want us to kind of write mini versions of that. And I'm happy that we didn't go down that route, and we went down a route where it doesn't matter if you are a boy, doesn't matter if, you know, what your any sort of background is, you will be able to resonate with Ade and Shanice, because they are brilliant, funny girls that are navigating life and friendships and all of these things, and it doesn't matter. And I think that's what we loved about Jacqueline Wilson books. That's what I loved about Illustrated Mum. That's all these books that have stayed with me. And every time I look at Jacqueline Wilson book to this day, my heart just goes, because I remember those characters being written in a way that I didn't have a perfect family situation growing up. That's the reality. But I was able to seek solace in those books because it didn't show perfect 2.0, you know, family setup, nuclear setups. So yeah, so I think that like the conversation around diversity needs to go beyond what is expected, and just allowing kids to be kids, and allowing writers and Black writers to integrate their experiences of, you know, of culture. Like, Ade is called Ade. Like Ade is a Nigerian name. Like, and I know that sounds really whatever, but like that is done deliberate, because we deserve books that have names that mirror our reality. Shanice is of a Caribbean heritage, but we talk about Shanice going on holiday, one of her last holidays with her mum and their family, to the Caribbean. And it's just so, it's like that. And I think that's what it should feel like. Feel seamless, not forced.
Do you know, that is such a good note for us to end this discussion on, because these are universal stories, and they're going to find all sorts of readers, as they should. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for making the time to come and talk to me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I really hope that people read your Offline Diaries, because I have to be honest, it's really good. I really did enjoy writing it. And I read it back now and I'm like, wow, very proud of it. So thank you for your time.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. This episode is generously sponsored by HarperCollins Children's Books. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.